The rain fell hard over Naples that October evening, turning the ancient cobblestones of Quartieri Spagnoli into mirrors that reflected the dim glow of street lamps. Giulia Romano pushed the wheels of her chair slowly through the narrow streets, her fingers aching from the cold and the effort. The cardboard box balanced on her lap held what remained of her day's work. 12 handmade flowers, delicate creations of paper and fabric that had taken her hours to craft at her small kitchen table. She was running late. Teresa, her elderly neighbor, would be worried. But the day had been slow, and Giulia couldn't afford to go home with a full box. Every flower she didn't sell meant another night of choosing between heating and food. The medieval buildings rose on either side of her like ancient sentinels, their facades painted in faded ochre and rose, peeling from decades of Mediterranean sun and salt air. Laundry hung between the windows above, motionless in the rain. The scent of coffee and pizza from the trattorias mixed with the smell of wet stone and diesel from the distant port. Giulia had learned to navigate these streets in her wheelchair, memorizing every uneven stone, every treacherous slope. The third-floor apartment where she lived had no elevator, but Teresa's nephew helped her up and down the stairs twice a day. It was a small dignity in a life that had taken so much from her. She was only 15 when the fire consumed her parents' small restaurant. She could still remember the heat, the smoke, the beams falling, and then the crushing weight across her back that had stolen her ability to walk, leaving her with legs that hung useless and a future that seemed just as empty. But Giulia had learned something in those 8 years since the accident. Survival required more than working legs. It required a stubborn heart and hands that could create beauty, even when surrounded by ugliness. The rain intensified as she reached the edge of the historic center, where the charming piazzas gave way to the industrial wasteland near the port. She shouldn't have come this way. Everyone in Naples knew the docks belonged to the Salvatore family, and the Salvatores answered to no one. A sharp crack echoed through the alley ahead, followed by raised voices speaking in the harsh Neapolitan dialect. Giulia froze, her hands gripping the wet wheels of her chair. Gunfire. She'd heard it before in this city where the Mafia moved like shadows beneath the tourist-friendly surface. She should turn back. But the narrow alley offered no room to maneuver her chair quickly, and the voices were getting closer. Panic seized her chest as she spotted a gap between 2 rusted shipping containers ahead. With desperate strength, she pushed herself toward it, her thin arms straining as the wheels caught on loose gravel. She barely squeezed into the space when 3 men appeared at the mouth of the alley, their expensive suits darkened by rain. One of them was dragging another man, this one bloodied and pleading in broken Italian. Giulia pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her heart hammering so loud she was certain they could hear it. "Please, per favore, I can get the money," the bleeding man gasped. "You've had 6 months, Domenico." The voice that answered was cold, devoid of mercy. "Marco doesn't give second chances." The gunshot that followed made Giulia's whole body flinch. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp, but the movement knocked the box from her lap. Flowers scattered across the wet ground, their delicate petals sodden and ruined. The sound of cardboard hitting concrete was soft, barely audible over the rain. But in that moment, it was as loud as thunder. Footsteps approached her hiding place, heavy, deliberate, unhurried. Giulia's entire body trembled as a figure stepped into the gap between the containers, blocking her only escape. The dim light from the distant street lamp illuminated him enough for her to see. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit despite the rain. His dark eyes found her immediately, and they were as cold as winter seas. Marco Salvatore. She didn't know his name then, but she recognized power when she saw it. And death. He studied her for a long moment, taking in the wheelchair, the ruined flowers scattered in the puddles, the way she shrank back against the corroded metal wall. His hand moved to the inside of his jacket, to the gun she knew must be there. "Please," Julia heard herself whisper, her voice breaking. Her throat was so tight she could barely force the words out. "Don't hurt me." "I can't walk." The words hung in the rain-soaked air between them. Marco's hand stilled. Something flickered across his face, a crack in that granite exterior, so quick she almost missed it. His dark eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he looked not at her, but through her, seeing something else entirely. He stood there, frozen, while rain dripped from his perfectly styled black hair and ran down the sharp planes of his face. The small scar on his left eyebrow seemed more prominent as his expression shifted through emotions she couldn't name. "Boss?" one of the men called from the alley. "Everything okay?" Marco didn't answer immediately. He continued to stare at Julia, at her terrified face, at her useless legs, at the wheelchair that trapped her in this moment with him. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, as if the words cost him something. "There's no one here." "You sure?" I said there's no one here." The command in his voice was absolute. "Get the car. We're done." Footsteps retreated. Engines started in the distance, but Marco didn't move, didn't take his eyes off Julia. The rain continued its relentless assault, and somewhere in the city, church bells chimed the hour. "You didn't see anything tonight," he finally said. It wasn't a question. Julia nodded frantically, her long brown hair plastered to her face. "Nothing. I saw nothing, I swear. I was just trying to get home." He glanced down at the ruined flowers, then back at her face. "Where do you live?" The question surprised her. "Quartieri Spagnoli. Via Toledo, number—" "I know where it is." He pulled something from his pocket, a money clip thick with euros. He peeled off several bills and held them out. When she didn't take them immediately, he crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level, and placed them in her trembling hands. "For the flowers. You don't have to. Take it." His voice was firm but not harsh. Up close, she could see his eyes weren't entirely black. They were the darkest brown, almost amber in the right light, flecks of gold hidden in shadow. "And don't come back here. These docks aren't safe for someone like you. Someone like me." The words came out more defensive than she intended. "Someone innocent." He stood, his towering frame once again blocking out what little light reached her hiding place. "Stay away from this part of the city. Next time, I might not be the one who finds you." He turned to leave, then paused at the edge of the containers. Without looking back, he spoke once more. "What's your name?" "Julia. Julia Romano." He didn't offer his own name. Didn't need to. In Naples, everyone knew the Salvatores. Instead, he simply nodded and walked away, his expensive shoes splashing through puddles, leaving her alone with her ruined flowers and a fistful of money she was afraid to count. Julia sat there long after the sound of engines faded, her entire body shaking with delayed shock. She'd witnessed a murder. She'd looked into the eyes of a Mafia boss. And somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. The money in her hands was more than she'd make in 3 months of selling flowers. She didn't want it. It felt wrong, tainted with blood. But as she looked down at her soaked clothes, her broken wheelchair that needed repairs she couldn't afford, the reality of her situation crushed those noble thoughts. Survival didn't care about moral purity. With great effort, she gathered what flowers could be salvaged and made her way home through streets that seemed darker than before, as if she'd crossed some invisible threshold between the Naples she knew and one far more dangerous. Teresa was waiting at the building entrance, her wrinkled face creased with worry beneath her floral headscarf. "Julia! Madonna Santa, where have you been? I was about to call—" She stopped when she saw the girl's face. "What happened?" "I got caught in the rain." "I'm sorry I worried you." The old woman's sharp eyes missed nothing. Not the pallor of Julia's skin. Not the way her hands still trembled. not the dampness that went beyond simple rain. But Teresa had lived in Naples for 70 years. She knew when questions were dangerous. "Come, let's get you inside and warm. I made minestrone." With practiced efficiency, Teresa's nephew Matteo appeared to help carry Giulia up the 3 flights of stairs. The young man was kind, always averting his eyes to give her dignity, as he lifted her, her chair following up after. Her tiny apartment felt even smaller than usual when she was finally alone. 2 rooms that held her entire life. A combination bedroom and living space where her mattress lay on the floor beside her work table, and a narrow kitchen with a temperamental stove and a window that looked down into the alley below. Giulia pulled herself onto her bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the scene in the docks over and over. The gunshot, the man's pleas, and those dark eyes studying her with an intensity that had made her feel simultaneously terrified and strangely seen. "Don't hurt me. I can't walk." She cringed at the memory of her own words. How small she'd sounded. How broken. But they'd saved her life, hadn't they? Something in that simple statement had reached through the killer's cold exterior and found... what? Compassion? Mercy? She didn't dare call it humanity. Marco Salvatore had spared her, and in doing so, he'd changed something fundamental in the trajectory of her life, though she didn't yet understand how deeply. Sleep came in fragments that night, interrupted by dreams of dark eyes and gunshots, of flowers blooming red in the rain. The next morning arrived with Mediterranean sunshine that seemed to mock the darkness of the previous night. Giulia went through her routine mechanically, transferring from bed to chair, washing at the small sink, dressing in a faded floral dress and cardigan that had been her mother's. Her hands assembled new flowers from muscle memory, while her mind wandered forbidden paths. She should forget it, forget him, go back to her invisible life of survival. But 3 days later, when she was setting up her usual spot in Piazza del Plebiscito, a man in a dark suit approached. Not Marco. This one was younger, with blonde hair and ice-blue eyes that assessed her with professional detachment. "Giulia Romano?" he asked in perfect Italian, though his accent suggested northern origins. Her blood turned cold. "Who's asking?" "I'm Luca. I work for Marco Salvatore." He crouched beside her chair, speaking quietly so the tourists photographing the royal palace wouldn't hear. "He wants to make sure you're keeping your promise, that you've forgotten what you saw." "I have. I told him I saw nothing, and I meant it." Luca's expression remained neutral, but something in his blue eyes softened slightly. "He also wanted me to give you this." He handed her an envelope, thick with paper. "Consider it an investment in your business. He noticed your flowers are popular with tourists." Giulia stared at the envelope like it was a snake. "I don't want his money. It's not a request. And it's not payment. Payment implies a transaction, which would make you an employee. This is simply a man with resources helping someone who needs it. Don't insult his generosity by refusing." The threat was implicit, gentle but present. Giulia took the envelope with shaking hands. Luca stood, brushed an invisible speck from his expensive suit, and smiled. A gesture that didn't reach his cold eyes. "One more thing. Marco has made it clear to everyone in this city that you're under his protection now. Do you understand what that means?" She shook her head mutely. "It means no one will bother you. The shop owners who usually chase you from their storefronts, the police who demand permits, the pickpockets and petty criminals, they'll all leave you alone, because touching you would be the same as crossing Marco Salvatore, and no one in Naples is that stupid." "Why would he do that?" Luca's expression flickered with something she couldn't identify. "I don't pretend to understand Marco's decisions anymore, but I'd suggest you accept this gift and live your life. Quietly, invisibly. The moment you become visible, really visible, you become a target for his enemies. And there are many who would love to hurt something he's chosen to protect." He left her there in the golden morning sun, surrounded by tourists snapping photos and couples holding hands, the envelope heavy in her lap like a chain she hadn't asked to wear. Julia opened it carefully. Inside were more euros than she'd ever seen in her life. Enough to fix her chair, to buy new materials for her flowers, to pay rent for a year. Enough to change everything. And beneath the money, a small card with elegant handwriting. For replacing the flowers that were ruined. Buy yourself something warm. Naples winters are cold. MS. She read those words a dozen times, searching for hidden meaning, for threat, for manipulation. But they sounded almost kind, concerned. It made him more dangerous somehow. She could handle a monster. But a monster with kindness? That was something else entirely. Over the following weeks, Julia discovered that Luca had told the truth. Her life transformed in subtle but profound ways. The baker who had always shouted at her to move from his doorway now nodded politely, and sometimes left day-old bread on her selling spot. The carabinieri who had once demanded to see permits she didn't have, now simply walked past with averted eyes. The other street vendors, once territorial and hostile, now gave her space, and even sent customers her way. She was invisible and protected simultaneously, a paradox that should have been impossible in Naples. Teresa noticed the change. One evening, as they shared dinner in Julia's tiny kitchen, the old woman spoke carefully. "You've made a dangerous friend, child. I didn't make any choice. He made it for me. Marco Salvatore doesn't do anything without reason. My cousin's son works at the port. He says Marco hasn't been the same since that night. Quieter. Distracted. Some of his men are worried." Julia's hand stilled on her fork. "What do you mean?" Teresa's weathered face was grave. "In Marco's world, distraction gets you killed. Weakness gets exploited. And you, my dear girl, have become both his distraction and his weakness. Whether you wanted to or not. I don't even know him. He saved my life once, and now he's... what? Looking out for me from a distance. That doesn't make me anything to him. Doesn't it?" Teresa reached across the small table and took Julia's hand. "I've lived in this city my whole life. I've watched the Mafia families rise and fall. I've seen men like Marco Salvatore, cold, calculating, untouchable. They don't spare witnesses. They don't protect random girls out of charity. Something about you reached him, Julia, and that makes you more valuable than all the protection he's given you. It also makes you a target the moment his enemies figure it out." The words settled over her like a shroud. Julia had spent 8 years learning to survive with her disability, learning to be small and invisible, and non-threatening. But now she was visible in the most dangerous way possible, visible to a man whose attention could get her killed. That night she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about dark eyes that had widened with something like shock when she'd said those words. "Don't hurt me. I can't walk." What had he seen in that moment? What memory had she triggered? And why couldn't she stop thinking about the way his voice had roughened when he'd told her to stay safe, as if he actually cared? She fell asleep with his card under her pillow, hating herself for the small comfort it provided. October gave way to November, and the Mediterranean winter came to Naples with cold winds and frequent rain. Julia used some of Marco's money to buy a warm wool coat, telling herself it was practical, not personal. She upgraded her materials and her flowers became more elaborate, attracting more customers. Her tiny savings account, dormant for so long, began to grow. She almost convinced herself that the incident at the docks was behind her. Almost. Then, on a Tuesday evening, as darkness fell early and cold, Julia was packing up her remaining flowers when she sensed someone watching. Not the casual observation of tourists, but focused, predatory attention. A man stood across the piazza, leaning against the fountain. Middle-aged, wearing a brown suit that had seen better days, with grey-streaked hair and eyes that tracked her every movement. When their gazes met, he smiled, a cold, calculated expression that made her skin crawl. She packed faster, her fingers fumbling with her basket. But when she turned to leave, another man had appeared behind her, blocking her path. Young, muscular, with a face that advertised violence. "Giulia Romano," the older man said, approaching slowly. His accent was Neapolitan, but different, harder, more brutal. "You're a difficult woman to get close to. Marco's protection is quite thorough." Her mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't insult my intelligence. Everyone in Naples knows Marco Salvatore has placed his protection over you. What they don't know is why. What's so special about a crippled flower girl that interests the great Marco Salvatore?" The slur hit like a physical blow, but Giulia kept her expression neutral. She'd heard worse. "Nothing. I'm no one." "That's what I thought at first." He crouched beside her chair, so close she could smell stale cigarettes and expensive cologne. "But then I started asking questions, and I learned that on the night of October 17th, Marco let a witness live. That's not like him. Marco Salvatore doesn't leave loose ends. Unless," he let the word hang, his cold eyes searching her face, "unless that witness means something to him, which makes you very interesting to me. I'm Vittorio Ferrante, by the way. I'm sure Marco has mentioned me." The name sent ice through her veins. Even she knew the Ferrante family, the Salvatore's primary rivals in the battle for control of Naples' underworld. "I don't know anything," she said firmly, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Marco Salvatore spared me because I'm no threat, that's all." "Perhaps," Vittorio's smile widened, "but I think it's more than that. I think he sees something in you. Something that reminds him of his dead sister, maybe. Or something that makes him feel human again." He stood, brushing off his knees. "Either way, you're valuable, and I have a proposition. I'm not interested in anything You'll want to hear this." His voice hardened. "You're going to help me destroy Marco Salvatore, willingly or not." Before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the evening air like a blade. "Step away from her. Now!" Luca emerged from the shadows near the royal palace, and he wasn't alone. 3 men in dark suits flanked him, their postures screaming trained violence. But it was Luca's expression that made Vittorio's smile falter, cold fury barely contained behind professional courtesy. "This is a public space, Luca. I'm simply having a conversation. A conversation Marco wouldn't approve of. You know the rules, Ferrante. She's protected." "Protected, but not claimed. There's a difference." Vittorio turned back to Giulia, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "Think about my offer, ragazza. You're in the middle of a war whether you like it or not. You can be a victim or a player. Choose wisely." He walked away with calculated leisure, his bodyguard following. Luca watched them go with tension radiating from every line of his body, then approached Giulia. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "What did he say to you?" "That I'm valuable. That Marco's protection makes me a target." She looked up at Luca, fear finally breaking through her composure. "He wants to use me to hurt Marco. And I can't. I don't want any part of this. I just want to sell my flowers and live my life." Luca's expression softened with something like pity. "That option ended the night you witnessed the execution. I'm sorry, Giulia. But you're in this now. Then what do I do?" He was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with a decision. Finally, he sighed. "Marco needs to know about this. The protection we've given you isn't enough anymore. Ferrante knows you exist, which means you need more than invisible guards. You need—" He stopped, looking uncomfortable. "Need what?" "You need to be where Marco can protect you personally. At the villa." Giulia's heart stuttered. "No, absolutely not. I'm not going to live with... It's not a request. Luca's voice was gentle but firm. Ferrante just declared his intentions publicly. Every criminal in Naples now knows you're Marco's weakness. Your apartment in Quartieri Spagnoli might as well have a target painted on it. If you stay there, you're dead within a week. So I'm a prisoner. You're protected. There's a difference. Funny, that's what Ferrante said. Luca actually smiled at that. A brief, rueful expression. The difference is that Marco won't hurt you. Ferrante absolutely will. Brutally. Publicly. To send a message. Is that what you want? Of course it wasn't. But the alternative, moving into the home of a Mafia boss, being under his constant observation, owing him even more than she already did, felt like its own kind of death. Can I at least pack my things? Say goodbye to Teresa? We'll arrange it. Tonight. Marco's orders. The words Marco's orders carried the weight of inevitability. Julia understood then that her life, whatever control she'd maintained over it, had just been taken away by a man she'd met once, who'd spared her for reasons she couldn't understand, and who now controlled her fate with absolute authority. 2 hours later, she sat in the back of a luxury sedan, her wheelchair folded in the trunk, her few possessions packed in 2 small bags. Teresa had cried when Julia explained she had to leave, though the old woman had understood better than anyone what it meant. Be careful, child. Men like Marco Salvatore don't save people out of kindness. There's always a price. The drive through Naples to Posillipo took them from the cramped, vibrant streets she knew to the hills where the wealthy made their homes behind high walls and iron gates. The villa appeared gradually as they climbed, a sprawling classical Italian mansion with manicured gardens and a view of the Gulf of Naples that would have been breathtaking under different circumstances. Guards checked the car at the gate. More guards patrolled the grounds. This wasn't just a home. It was a fortress. Luca helped her from the car, and a woman in her 50s appeared with a manual wheelchair, newer and better than her old one. I'm Sophia, the housekeeper. I'll show you to your room. Where's Marco? Julia asked before she could stop herself. Business, Luca said shortly. He'll return later tonight. For now, get settled. Tomorrow he'll want to speak with you. Her room wasn't a room. It was a suite larger than her entire apartment. Marble floors, antique furniture, French doors, opening to a balcony with that impossible view. A bed so large she could have fit 3 of her old mattresses in it, an attached bathroom with heated floors, and a shower designed for accessibility. It was beautiful, luxurious, and it felt like a cage. Sophia helped her settle in with efficient kindness, showing her where everything was, explaining the house's layout. Dinner is at 8 if you'd like to join us in the dining room. Or I can bring something to your room if you prefer. My room, please. The thought of sitting at a table with Marco Salvatore, of making conversation, of pretending this was normal, was too much. Of course. Ring if you need anything. Sophia indicated a pull cord by the bed. There's always someone available. When she was finally alone, Julia wheeled to the French doors and opened them, letting the cool November air wash over her face. The city spread below, a sprawl of lights beginning to emerge as dusk deepened. Somewhere down there was her old life, her apartment, the streets she knew, all of it impossibly far away now. She'd been rescued, she'd been protected, and she'd never felt more trapped. Footsteps in the hallway made her turn from the view. Heavy, measured steps that stopped outside her door. A knock, firm but not aggressive. Julia, it's Marco. May I come in? Her heart hammered. She could say no. She could maintain some illusion of control. But they both knew the truth. She was here at his command, living under his roof, breathing, because he allowed it. Yes. The door opened, and Marco Salvatore stepped into her room, and Julia was struck again by his physical presence. The way he filled space, commanded attention without trying. He'd removed his suit jacket, His white shirt rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. His dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it. Those nearly black eyes found her immediately, and in the soft evening light, she could see the gold flecks she'd noticed before. He looked tired, and something else. Uncomfortable, as if he didn't quite know how to be here, in this room, with her. "I'm sorry," he said abruptly, "for bringing you here like this, for not giving you a choice." The apology surprised her. Monsters didn't apologize. "Then give me one now. Let me go home." "You know I can't do that. Ferrante has marked you. Your home isn't safe anymore. Because of you. Because you decided to spare me that night. Because you've been protecting me and everyone noticed, and now I'm..." What? Bait? Leverage? A weakness to exploit? He flinched. An almost imperceptible movement. But she saw it. "Yes, all of those things. Which is why you're here now, where I can actually protect you. I didn't ask for your protection. I didn't ask for any of this. I know." He moved further into the room but stopped well short of where she sat by the balcony, as if aware of how his presence might overwhelm her. "But you have it anyway. And I don't know how to make you understand." He stopped, jaw tightening with frustration. "Understand what?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw in a way she'd never heard. "When I found you that night, hiding between those containers, terrified and vulnerable, something in me broke, or maybe it woke up. I don't know." He looked away, toward the darkening view of the Gulf. "You said, 'Don't hurt me. I can't walk.' And all I could see was my sister." The confession hung in the air between them. Julia barely dared breathe, afraid that any movement would make him stop talking, stop showing her this glimpse behind his carefully maintained armor. "Her name was Alessia," Marco continued, still not looking at her. "She was 12 when she died. Bone cancer. I was 17. I watched her fade for 2 years, watched her lose the ability to walk, watched her beg for the pain to stop, and I couldn't do anything. Couldn't save her. Couldn't even ease her suffering at the end." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "My father was a monster. He built his empire on blood and fear, and he taught me to do the same. But Alessia was pure. Good. She saw past all the violence to who I might have been if I'd been born into a different family." He finally turned back to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression made him look younger, less like the feared Mafia boss, and more like the 17-year-old boy who'd lost his sister. "When you looked at me with those scared eyes and told me you couldn't walk, for a moment I saw her, and I couldn't..." His voice broke. "I couldn't hurt you. I couldn't be that person again. Not to someone who reminded me that I used to be capable of caring about something other than power." Julia felt tears burning in her eyes. This was the answer to the question that had haunted her. Why he'd spared her. Why he'd protected her. Not because she was special, but because she'd reminded him of something he'd lost. Someone he'd failed to save. It should have made her feel used. Instead, it made her understand him in a way that was almost painful. "I'm not your sister, Marco. I can't be her for you. I know that, I do, but..." He stepped closer, and she could see the conflict in his face. The war between what he was and what he wished he could be. "But maybe you can be the person who reminds me I'm still human. That somewhere under all this blood, I'm still the boy who loved his sister enough to cry when she died. That's a heavy burden to place on someone you barely know. I know. It's selfish. I'm selfish. I've taken your life and twisted it to suit my needs. Convinced myself it's protection, when it's really just my inability to let go of a ghost. If you hate me for it, I'd understand." She should hate him. By all logic, all reason. She should despise him for everything he'd done. For killing people, for dragging her into his world. for making her a target. But as she looked at him standing there, stripped of his usual cold confidence, she felt something far more complicated than hate. "I don't hate you," she said softly, "but I'm scared. Of you. Of this life. Of what happens when your enemies decide I'm worth more dead than alive. Then we teach them," Marco said, his voice hardening with determination, "that touching you means declaring war on me. That hurting you would cost them everything they have. I'll burn Naples to the ground before I let anyone harm you." The intensity of his promise should have been terrifying. Instead, it made her feel something she hadn't felt in 8 years. Safe. Truly. Deeply safe. Even if that safety came from the most dangerous man in the city. "Why?" she asked. "Why go that far for someone you barely know?" He moved closer until he was standing directly in front of her chair, and slowly, carefully, as if approaching something precious and fragile, he crouched down to her eye level. Up close, she could see every detail of his face. The scar through his eyebrow, the shadow of stubble along his sharp jaw, the way his dark eyes held galaxies of pain he'd never show anyone else. "Because when I look at you," he said quietly, "I remember who I wanted to be before the world turned me into what I am. And maybe if I can protect you, if I can keep you safe and give you the life you deserve, it'll prove that I'm not completely lost, that there's still something in me worth saving." His words settled over her like snow, cold and gentle and impossible to ignore. This man, this killer, this crime lord, this broken soul, needed her as much as she needed his protection. They were two damaged people finding an unexpected lifeline in each other. Julia reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. When he didn't, she placed her hand on his cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm, the warmth of his skin. He closed his eyes at her touch, leaning into it like a man starving for gentleness. "I'm scared," she whispered again. "But I'll stay. Not because I don't have a choice, but because I think maybe you're right. Maybe we can save each other." When he opened his eyes, they were bright with emotion he clearly didn't know how to process. "I don't deserve your kindness." "Maybe not. But you'll have it anyway." He caught her hand in his, holding it against his face like it was something precious. They stayed that way for a long moment, two people from different worlds finding unexpected connection in the midst of chaos. Finally, Marco stood, gently releasing her hand. "I need to go handle some things. Make sure Ferrante understands that approaching you again would be suicide. But I'll be back later. If you need anything at all, Sophia will help. And Luca is outside your door. No one will hurt you here. I promise." "Okay." He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Without turning around, he spoke once more. "Thank you, Julia, for not hating me. It's more than I deserve." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the weight of everything that had just shifted between them. Over the next few weeks, Julia slowly adapted to life at the villa. It was a strange existence, luxurious, yet isolated, safe yet confining. She had everything she could need materially, but her freedom was constrained by invisible bars of protection and danger. Sophia became a friend, teaching her to navigate the massive house in her wheelchair and sharing stories about Marco that painted him in softer colors. He was different before his father died, the housekeeper confided one morning over coffee. Still serious, still dedicated to the family. But there was lightness in him. After he became boss, that lightness disappeared. Until you came. I haven't changed him, Julia protested. I've only made him a target. You've reminded him he has a heart. That's something no one else has managed in 8 years. Marco kept his distance initially, as if afraid of overwhelming her. They'd pass each other in hallways, exchange polite good mornings over breakfast when his schedule allowed. but he maintained a careful space between them. Yet Julia noticed the small ways he cared. Fresh flowers appearing in her room each morning, books she might enjoy on her nightstand, the heated pool that was suddenly made accessible with a lift so she could swim for physical therapy. He was protecting her, yes, but he was also trying to give her a life, not just an existence. The tension broke one evening in mid-December. Julia was in the library, a magnificent room, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books, when Marco appeared in the doorway. He looked exhausted, his suit rumpled, a shadow of blood on his collar he'd missed when cleaning up. "Are you hurt?" she asked immediately, wheeling toward him. He glanced at the blood, then shook his head. "It's not mine. Ferrante made a move tonight. We handled it." His voice was flat, emotionless. The voice of the killer, not the vulnerable man who'd shared his pain with her. "You should clean that off before it stains." "It doesn't matter. Nothing matters." He moved into the room, poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey from the crystal decanter, and downed it in one swallow. "Do you know what I did tonight, Julia? I executed 3 men. Not because they'd wronged me personally, but because Ferrante sent them to prove a point. They were barely in their 20s. Someone's sons, maybe someone's brothers." He poured another glass, staring into the amber liquid. "And I feel nothing. That's what I've become. A man who kills and feels nothing." My father would be proud. Julia had seen Marco in many states. Cold, protective, vulnerable. But this defeated emptiness was something new and deeply troubling. She wheeled closer until she was beside him at the bar. "You feel nothing because if you let yourself feel, the weight of it would crush you," she said quietly. "That's survival, Marco, not lack of humanity." "Is it?" He laughed bitterly. "Or is it proof that I'm exactly what everyone says I am? A monster, a killer, someone who should have died instead of Alessia. At least she was good, pure. The world needed her more than it will ever need me." "Stop!" The word came out sharper than she intended. "Stop using your sister's memory as a weapon against yourself. You think she'd want you to torture yourself like this? To believe you're worthless? She'd want me to be better than I am. Then be better. Not by dying or by hating yourself, but by making choices that honor her memory. You spared me that night. That was a choice. You've protected me even though it's made you vulnerable. That was a choice. You've given me safety and comfort when you could have just locked me away in a safe house somewhere. That was a choice. Those choices matter, Marco." He set down his glass and turned to face her fully, and the anguish in his expression broke her heart. "I don't know how to be anything other than this. Violence is all I know. It's all I'm good at." Without overthinking it, Julia reached for his hand and pulled him down until he was kneeling beside her chair, the position becoming familiar now, the way he made himself smaller to meet her at eye level. She cupped his face in both hands, forcing him to look at her. "You're good at protecting people you care about. You're good at remembering your sister with love instead of just grief. You're good at making a broken girl feel safe in a world that's been cruel to her. Those things count, Marco. They matter. You make me want to believe that. Want to believe I could be someone worth knowing. You are worth knowing. The real you. Not the boss, not the killer, but the man who puts flowers in my room and makes sure the pool is warm enough before I swim. The man who checks on me every morning even though he pretends he's just passing by. That man is worth knowing." Something shifted in his expression. Hope warring with fear, desire fighting with restraint. "I want to be that man for you. Only for you. Then be him." The distance between them collapsed. Marco's hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his face, and he leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, when she actually leaned toward him, he closed the final distance and kissed her. It was gentle, achingly, unexpectedly gentle for a man capable of such violence. His lips were soft against hers, questioning rather than demanding. One of his hands came up to cradle the back of her head, fingers tangling in her long brown hair, while the other rested carefully on her knee. Present but not possessive, Julia kissed him back, tasting whiskey and desperation, and something like salvation. Her hands slid from his face to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him, the way his body trembled slightly, as if he were holding himself back with enormous effort. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you," he whispered. "I know I shouldn't. I know it's dangerous and selfish and wrong, but I can't seem to stop." Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Then don't stop. I'm falling too, Marco. Against all logic and self-preservation, I'm falling in love with you. I'll hurt you. Not intentionally, but my life, my world. It's designed to destroy anything good. Then we'll be careful. We'll be smart. But don't ask me to pretend I don't feel this. Don't ask me to walk away from the only person who's made me feel alive since the fire." He pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I will protect you with everything I have. I will move heaven and earth to keep you safe. You're mine now, Julia, and I'm yours. Whatever that means, however dangerous it is, I'm yours. I'm yours," she echoed, sealing the promise between them. What followed were weeks that felt stolen from reality. A bubble of happiness existing in the midst of ongoing war. Marco still conducted his business, still made the hard decisions required of a Mafia boss. But with Julia he was different, softer, more human. They spent evenings together in the library, her reading while he handled paperwork, comfortable in shared silence. He taught her to play chess, laughing when she beat him within 2 weeks. She taught him about flowers, about art, about finding beauty in small things. They swam together in the heated pool, Marco staying close in case she needed help, his hands gentle and respectful, even as desire simmered between them. And they talked, really talked, the way people do when they're falling in love, about dreams and fears, about the lives they'd lived and the lives they wished they could have. Marco told her about his father's cruelty, about the violence that had shaped him. Julia shared her memories of the fire, of waking up unable to walk, of 8 years of survival and loneliness. "I used to think my disability made me weak," she confessed one night as they lay together on a blanket under the stars, Marco having carried her to the villa's roof terrace. "That it made me less than others. But you don't see me that way. I see you as the strongest person I know. You survived something that would have destroyed most people, and you did it with grace and kindness intact. Your disability isn't weakness, Julia. It's proof of your resilience." She turned her head to look at him, this complicated man who held such darkness and such light inside him. "You've given me so much. Safety, comfort, love. What can I possibly give you in return? You already have. You've given me hope that I'm not beyond redemption, purpose beyond power, a reason to want to be better." He rolled onto his side, propping himself on his elbow to look down at her. "You've given me a future worth living for." Their second kiss was different from the first. Less tentative, more certain. Marco's hand traced the curve of her face, her neck, her shoulder, mapping her with reverent touches. When they finally pulled apart, he looked at her with such intensity it stole her breath. "Stay with me," he said. "Not just tonight, but always. Marry me, Julia. Let me spend my life protecting you and learning to be worthy of you." The proposal should have terrified her. They'd known each other barely 2 months. Their relationship existed in defiance of every reasonable objection. But looking into his eyes, feeling the truth of his love in every touch, every word, every sacrifice he'd made for her safety, she knew her answer. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." Joy transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. He kissed her again, and again, and again, as if he couldn't quite believe she'd said yes. And maybe he couldn't. Maybe Marco Salvatore, who commanded fear and respect from all of Naples, couldn't quite believe that someone could love him for who he was beneath the armor. But Giulia did. Against all odds, against all reason. She loved him completely. They announced their engagement quietly. To Sophia, who cried with happiness. To Luca, who looked concerned but supportive. To Teresa, who Giulia visited under heavy guard and who simply held her and whispered, "Be happy, child. God knows you deserve it." The announcement also reached Vittorio Ferrante, and it changed everything. The attack came on a cold January evening, 2 weeks before their planned wedding. Marco was at a meeting across the city, Luca with him. Giulia was in her room, Sophia helping her prepare for bed, when the first explosion rocked the villa's east wing. The lights died instantly. Emergency generators kicked in, bathing everything in red emergency lighting. Sophia grabbed Giulia's chair and pushed her toward the panic room. Marco had built specifically for situations like this, a reinforced safe room in the villa's core with communication equipment and supplies. They almost made it. 3 men burst through the bedroom door, faces covered, weapons drawn. Sophia threw herself in front of Giulia's chair, and the gunshot that followed would haunt Giulia's nightmares forever. The housekeeper crumpled, blood blooming across her floral dress. "No!" Giulia's scream tore from her throat as hands grabbed her chair, yanking her away from Sophia's body. She fought, hitting, scratching, biting. But she had no leverage, no legs to help her fight. They lifted her bodily from the chair and carried her like a sack, her useless legs dragging behind. More gunfire echoed through the villa, Marco's guards fighting back. But Ferrante's men had planned well. They had numbers and surprise. Giulia was carried through smoke and chaos, through the destroyed gardens, to a waiting van. They threw her inside and slammed the doors. Her hands were zip-tied, a hood pulled over her head. The van accelerated, tires squealing, and she knew. She was being taken to Vittorio Ferrante, and whatever he had planned, it would be designed to hurt Marco in the most devastating way possible. Through her, the drive seemed endless, though it probably lasted less than 30 minutes. When the van finally stopped and they pulled her out, the hood still obscuring her vision, she could smell the sea, salt and fish and diesel. The docks. She was at the port, probably in Ferrante territory. They carried her into a building, a warehouse from the echoing acoustics and the cold that seeped through the concrete. When they finally yanked off the hood, she had to blink against the harsh overhead lights. Vittorio Ferrante stood before her, that same cold smile on his face. Behind him, a dozen armed men, and in the center of the warehouse, a chair with leather straps, the kind designed for torture. "Giulia Romano," Vittorio said pleasantly, as if they'd met for coffee. "Or should I say, Giulia Salvatore de B. Congratulations on your engagement. Such a beautiful love story. The monster and the crippled girl. Naples can't stop talking about it." "Marco will kill you for this," Giulia said, proud that her voice stayed steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Oh, I'm counting on him trying. You see, that's the point. Marco has become predictable, soft. He'll come for you personally, leave his defenses weakened and walk right into my trap. You're not a person to me, Giulia. You're bait. The most effective bait possible. He's smarter than you think. Maybe. But he's also in love, which makes him stupid. Love is a weakness in our world. I taught my sons that. Never love anything you can't afford to lose." Marco forgot that lesson. Now he'll pay the price. Vittorio gestured to his men. "Put her in the chair, and someone call Marco. Tell him we have his fiancée, and if he wants her back alive, he'll come alone. No Luca, no guards, no backup, just him. They strapped her into the chair. Arms, chest, legs that couldn't run even if they were free. Julia tried to stay calm, tried to think of a way out, but her mind kept returning to Sophia's body, on the bedroom floor, to the life draining from her eyes. How many more people would die because Marco had decided to protect her? How many more lives would be destroyed? An hour passed. 2. Vittorio paced, checking his phone, occasionally glancing at her with that reptilian smile. His men stood ready, weapons loaded, clearly expecting a war. When Marco's call came, Vittorio put it on speaker. "I have what you want, Marco. Are you ready to trade your life for hers? Let me hear her voice." Marco's tone was utterly flat, but Julia could hear the barely contained fury beneath it. "Proof of life, Ferrante. Or this ends now." Vittorio held the phone close to Julia's face. "Say hello to your fidanzato." "Marco." Her voice cracked. "Don't come. It's a trap. He has dozens of men and—" Vittorio pulled the phone away. "As you can hear, she's alive. For now. You have 1 hour to reach the old fish processing plant at Dock 7. Come alone, Marco. Any sign of backup and I'll mail her to you in pieces, starting with those useless legs." The call ended. Vittorio looked pleased with himself. Now we wait, and prepare to end the reign of Marco Salvatore. Julia closed her eyes, tears finally breaking through. She'd been saved once by Marco's mercy, had found love and safety in his protection. And now that protection would kill him. He'd come for her. She knew he would, even if it meant walking into certain death, unless she could find a way to stop it. The warehouse had high windows, she noted, letting in the dim glow of dock lights. She could hear water lapping against pilings, ships' horns in the distance. There were exits at both ends, the main cargo doors through which they'd brought her, and a smaller door on the far side. Ferrante's men were positioned strategically, by the doors, in the catwalks above, creating a kill box. Marco would be dead the moment he entered. Unless— "Can I have some water?" she asked Vittorio. "Please, my throat is dry." He studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Why not? You should be comfortable for your last hours." He nodded to one of his men. "Get her water. And be quick. We don't have much time." The man approached with a bottle, tilted it to her lips. Julia drank gratefully, buying time to think. When Marco arrived, if she could create some kind of distraction, give him even a few seconds of advantage. But what could she do? Strapped to a chair, unable to walk. She was helpless. She'd always been helpless when it mattered most. During the fire, she couldn't save her parents. In her disability, she couldn't live without help. And now, she couldn't save the man she loved. Or could she? An idea formed. Desperate, probably futile, but the only chance she could see. She started coughing, violently, as if the water had gone down wrong. The guard stepped closer, concerned, and she coughed harder, gasping for air, her face reddening with effort. "What's wrong with her?" Vittorio demanded. "I think she's choking." The guard started to reach for her restraints, to lean her forward. Julia stopped coughing abruptly and smiled. "Nothing's wrong. Just wanted to see if you'd panic. Guess even killers have some humanity left." The guard's face darkened with anger, and he raised his hand to strike her. But Vittorio's voice stopped him. "Leave her. Save your energy for Marco." The hour crept by with agonizing slowness. Julia's mind raced through scenarios, through possibilities, finding nothing useful. She was going to watch Marco die trying to save her. And then Ferrante would probably kill her anyway, leaving both of them dead and this tragic love story ending in blood. She wished she'd told Marco she loved him more often. Wished they'd had more time. Wished she could have been the reason he became better instead of the reason he got killed. Then, cutting through the warehouse's tense silence, came the sound of a vehicle approaching. One vehicle. Marco had actually come alone. Vittorio's smile widened. "Everyone ready. Wait for my signal." The engine stopped. A door slammed. Footsteps approached the main cargo entrance. Slow, unhurried, as if Marco had all the time in the world. The contrast between his casual pace and the urgency of the situation was almost surreal. The cargo door ground open, and Marco Salvatore walked into the warehouse alone, wearing his usual black suit, hands visibly empty, and raised slightly to show he was unarmed. His eyes found Julia immediately, and the relief that flashed across his face was almost painful to witness. But then his expression hardened back into that cold mask she'd seen the night they met. "I'm here, Ferrante. Let her go." "Not quite yet," Vittorio gestured, and his men moved from concealment, surrounding Marco with a wall of weapons. "First, I want to savor this moment. The great Marco Salvatore, brought low by love. Your father must be spinning in his grave." "Ah, my father was a monster. If this is what being different from him looks like, I'll accept it. Noble, stupid but noble. You realize you're going to die here, right? That coming for her was suicide? I realize you've made a fatal miscalculation." Marco's voice remained utterly calm. "You assumed I'd come alone because I love her. You assumed love made me weak and reckless. But you forgot something important, Ferrante." "What's that?" "I've been in this business longer than you think. And I learned a long time ago that sometimes you need to look weak to draw out your real enemies." Marco smiled. Cold, predatory. Nothing like the gentle expression Julia had grown to know. "I didn't come alone. I came first. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the warehouse exploded into chaos. The windows shattered as armed men, Marco's men, rappelled down from the catwalks where they'd been hidden. The far door burst open, and Luca charged through with 24 soldiers. The cargo door Marco had entered through was suddenly blocked by vehicles, trapping Ferrante's men inside. It had all been a trap. Marco had let himself be bait to draw out all of Ferrante's soldiers in one place, where they could be destroyed completely. The gunfight was brief and brutal. Ferrante's men tried to fight back, but they were surrounded, outmaneuvered, caught completely off guard. Marco moved like liquid death through the chaos, producing weapons that had been hidden on his person, despite his appearance of being unarmed. Through it all, Julia watched in frozen horror as the man she loved became the monster everyone said he was. He moved with lethal efficiency, every shot finding its target, his face empty of emotion. This was the real Marco Salvatore, not the gentleman who brought her flowers, but the crime lord who'd built an empire on fear. Within minutes, it was over. Ferrante's men were dead or subdued, and Vittorio Ferrante himself was on his knees before Marco, blood streaming from a wound in his shoulder. "Please," Ferrante begged, all his earlier confidence gone. "Please, Marco. I'll leave Naples. I'll give you everything. Just let me live." Marco stood over him, gun pointed at Ferrante's head, and the warehouse fell silent except for Julia's ragged breathing and the distant sound of sirens that wouldn't arrive in time to matter. "You threatened her," Marco said quietly. "You attacked my home. You killed Sophia, who never hurt anyone in her life. You strapped the woman I loved to a chair and planned to torture her to death just to hurt me." He cocked the gun. "There is no world in which you walk away from that. Marco, please. Beg her, not me. She's the one with mercy. I'm just the monster you wanted me to be." Marco's eyes finally found Julia's across the warehouse. And in that moment, she saw the question in them. Saw him asking her permission, asking if she could accept what he was about to do, asking if this would be the moment she finally couldn't forgive him. She thought about Sophia's body, about the terror of being taken, about all the people who died tonight because one man's greed had escalated into war. And she thought about the world Marco lived in, where mercy was often just delayed death, where letting enemies live meant giving them another chance to destroy you. She gave the smallest nod. Not approval exactly, but understanding, acceptance that this was who Marco had to be to survive in his world. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse. Vittorio Ferrante fell, and an era of conflict in Naples ended with him. Marco lowered his weapon and walked directly to Giulia, holstering the gun and pulling a knife to cut her restraints. His hands were shaking, barely noticeable, but she saw it. The calm mask was cracking now that the danger had passed. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, almost broken. "Did they?" "I'm okay. Bruises, but I'm okay." Her hands were free, and she immediately reached for him, pulling him down to her eye level. "You came for me. Always. I will always come for you. I thought you were going to die. I thought—" "Shh." He pressed his forehead against hers, and she felt wetness on his cheeks. Tears from a man who probably hadn't cried since his sister died. "You're safe. That's all that matters. You're safe." Luca appeared beside them, respectfully averting his eyes. "Boss, we need to move. Police will be here soon, and we need to clean this up." Marco nodded but didn't move away from Giulia. "Get her chair, and call Dr. Russo. I want her checked thoroughly, despite what she says. Then we're going home. The villa is secure. We lost 3 men in the attack, but we've eliminated all Ferrante's soldiers. The family is finished." "Good. Make sure Sophia's family's taken care of. Whatever they need, they get it. She died protecting what I love. That debt can never be fully repaid, but we'll do everything possible. Already arranged, boss." Marco finally pulled back enough to look at Giulia properly, his hands framing her face. "I'm sorry. This is my fault. My world, my violence, my—" She pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping the self-recrimination. "No. This is Ferrante's fault. He made choices that led to this. You made choices that saved me. Don't confuse the two. You watched me kill him. You watched me be the monster. I watched you protect what you love. There's a difference. Is there? Because I'm not sure anymore. When I thought Ferrante had you, when I imagined what he might do to you, I became something I don't think you've ever seen. Something that scared even my own men. You became someone fighting for love. That's not monstrous, Marco. It's human." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, his powerful body shaking with delayed reaction. "I can't lose you. I can't. You're the only good thing in my life, the only thing that makes me want to be better. Then be better. Not by denying who you are, but by choosing mercy when you can, by building instead of just destroying. You have power, Marco. Use it for something more than just survival." They stayed that way for a long moment, 2 people who'd found each other against all odds, holding tight in the aftermath of violence. Around them, Marco's men worked efficiently to clean the warehouse, to erase evidence, to restore order from chaos. This was Marco's world, brutal, unforgiving, soaked in blood. But it was also a world where he'd risked everything to save her, where love could exist even in darkness, where broken people could find healing in each other's arms. The wedding happened 3 weeks later, quiet and private in the villa's restored gardens. Teresa came and a few of Marco's most trusted men. No photographers, no announcement to the press, nothing that would paint a target on them again. Giulia wore a simple ivory dress, her mother's pearl necklace at her throat. Marco wore his usual black suit, but his eyes were soft as he watched her wheel down the makeshift aisle between flowering trees he'd had planted specifically for this day. Father Giuseppe, the only priest in Naples brave enough to officiate a Mafia wedding, kept the ceremony brief. When it came time for vows, Marco spoke in a voice thick with emotion. "I can't promise you a safe life. I can't promise you a normal one, but I can promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your love, that I will protect you with my last breath, that I will honor your kindness by trying to be a better man than the one I was before you. You saved me, Julia. Let me spend our lives returning the favor." Julia's tears fell freely as she responded. "You gave me safety when I had none, purpose when I felt useless, love when I thought I'd spend my life alone. You're not the monster everyone says you are, Marco. You're a man trying to find light in darkness, and I will stand with you, sit with you, beside you, always, in this world or the next." They sealed the vows with a kiss that felt like a promise, like hope, like the beginning of something that shouldn't exist but did anyway. In the months and years that followed, Marco gradually transformed his empire. Not away from crime. That would have been impossible. But toward less violent operations. He focused on legitimate businesses, used his power to protect the vulnerable in Naples' neighborhoods, became known as a boss who valued loyalty over fear. It wasn't complete redemption. He was still a criminal, still made hard choices, still had blood on his hands. But he was different. Softer in private, more measured in public, less quick to choose violence when other options existed. Julia became his conscience and his peace. She returned to selling flowers, but from a small shop Marco bought for her in the historic center. Accessible, safe, protected. She used some of her newfound resources to help other people with disabilities in Naples, creating opportunities that hadn't existed before. Together they were proof that love could exist in the most unlikely places, that broken people could heal each other, that a woman who couldn't walk and a man who'd lost his way could find something worth living for in each other's arms. On quiet evenings, they'd sit together on the villa's terrace overlooking the Gulf of Naples, watching the sun set over the city that had brought them together. Marco would hold her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm, and sometimes he'd speak about Alessia, remembering her without the crushing weight of guilt, honoring her memory by being the brother she'd always believed he could be. "Do you think she'd approve?" he asked one evening, the golden light painting everything in warmth. "Of us? Of what I've become?" Julia squeezed his hand. "I think she'd be proud of you for finding your way back to yourself, for learning that strength isn't just about power, but about choosing mercy, about protecting love instead of destroying it. I almost destroyed it. That night at the docks, if I hadn't prepared properly, if I'd actually come alone. But you didn't. You were smart and careful, and you saved me. Stop torturing yourself with what-ifs." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "How did I get so lucky? Finding you that night should have been the end of everything. Instead, it was the beginning. Maybe that's what mercy looks like. You chose not to hurt me, and that one choice changed both our lives. It gave us this. This was a life neither of them had imagined possible. Not perfect. Perfection didn't exist in their world, but real, precious, worth every sacrifice and risk." Years later, when Teresa passed away peacefully in her sleep, she left Julia a letter. In it, she wrote, "I was afraid for you, child. When you told me you'd fallen for Marco Salvatore, I thought he'd destroy you, consume you, drag you into darkness you couldn't escape, but I was wrong. You didn't fall into his darkness. You brought light to it, and he didn't consume you. He cherished you. Love finds a way, even in the strangest places. Be happy, my girl. God knows you earned it." Julia kept that letter in the drawer beside their bed, reading it sometimes when she needed the reminder that what they'd built was real. That the poor girl who'd whispered, "Don't hurt me, I can't walk," and the Mafia boss who'd frozen at those words had somehow found their way to something that looked like happiness. It wasn't the love story anyone would have predicted. It wasn't safe or conventional or approved by society. But it was theirs, forged in danger, tested by violence, and ultimately proven by choice. Every day Marco chose to be worthy of her love, and every day Julia chose to believe in the man behind the monster. In a city like Naples, where ancient beauty lived alongside modern corruption, where joy and danger danced together in narrow streets, their story became legend. The boss who'd gone soft for a flower girl, the disabled woman who'd tamed a killer's heart. People whispered about them in trattorias, in markets, in the quiet moments when Naples revealed its secrets. But Marco and Julia didn't care about legends. They cared about mornings waking up together, about shared meals and quiet conversations, about building a life that honored both the darkness they'd survived and the light they'd found in each other. On the anniversary of the night they met, Marco always brought Julia to that spot near the docks, now transformed into a small memorial garden he'd built in Sophia's memory. They'd sit together in the twilight, remembering how it all began with fear and mercy and a whispered plea that had changed everything. "I love you," Marco would say every year, his voice still carrying wonder that this was real. "I love you too," Julia would answer, her hand in his, her heart full of gratitude for the unexpected paths life sometimes took. They'd survived the fire and the bullets and the darkness. They'd found each other in the ruins of their broken lives, and they'd built something beautiful from the ashes. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and lasting and worth every moment of fear it took to get there. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.